Goodness gracious, it is a great day to rank some wide receivers ahead of the 2025 season. And I know what you might be thinking, Ian, it's only March. Why would we be doing this already? And my response, why not? We got some movement going on in free agency. Some trades went down. It is never too early to get a new, fresh view of the landscape at, again, one of the most important positions, both in real life and in fantasy land. But I cannot accomplish this task on my own. Accordingly, the one, the only Dwain, the Rock McFarland is joining me today. And Dwain, happy Wide Receiver Tuesday.
Happy Wide Receiver Tuesday. Look, it's always a great day to talk football, but we talk wide receivers and we talk about how it is the most talent-driven skill position player. Obviously, quarterback's very talent-driven. Running back, we want talent, but ultimately, as long as they give them the carries, like they can score fantasy points. Tight ends are like somewhere in between. Like there truly are the really talented tight ends that no one can take away or cover. They're pretty rare, but wide receiver, like how this goes, Ian. You can get on the field in a pinch and you're out there running routes, but that doesn't mean you're going to score fantasy points if you're not good. So it's always one of my favorite positions to talk about because you got to be a baller to score fantasy points.
And as we see with some of those salaries recently, a.k.a. the Cincinnati Bengals making Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, some very rich men, certainly a position that is being valued, at a high level by NFL teams as well. So, Dwain, speaking of Jamar Chase, let's go ahead and head over to our Fantasy Life rankings, updated over at fantasylife.com for your viewing pleasure, where we all consensusly have Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, and Puka Nacua making up our top four. So, again, I don't think it takes rocket scientists or, a true ball knower to realize these are four, straight up, again, amazing wide receivers, both in real life and in fantasy. However, Dwain, just for the purposes of trying to be a bit different here, who could you feasibly see maybe finishing outside the top 12 if something goes wrong?
Out of our top four, I would say I would lean to Puka Nacua just because you had Davante Adams, who had a really good year last year, challenging him for targets. But at the same time, I still like Puka, right? But I could see him finishing behind Nico Collins, Brian Thomas Jr., something along those lines. Like there's a road for everyone. Like Justin Jefferson, we don't know what we're going to have with JJ McCarthy, assuming that this team doesn't sign Aaron Rodgers. Sorry, Thor, that I even had to bring it up. You know how that goes. So, last year, Jefferson did overcome it with Sam Darnold, honestly, career year, like turned into a different player in the Kevin O'Connell offense and was really spinning it. Are we going to get the same thing from JJ McCarthy? We don't know. So I think there's some risk factors there. Jamar Chase probably has the least right now because we know we got Joe Burrow. We know we've got a pass-heavy offense. Yeah, he's playing opposite of T. Higgins, but he's been doing that for multiple years, right? And we've already seen him put up these top fantasy performances. So I would lean towards Justin Jefferson and Puka having the most risk, but I'm not moving Justin Jefferson out of wide receiver 2. Like it's not enough to worry me that much. I think you could make an argument to put Lamb over him, but I like all these guys.
For Chase's purposes, I do think it would have to come down to an injury to Joe Burrow. We did see him only finish as the wide receiver 12 in PPR points per game when that reality did happen back in the 2023 season. But as we saw last year with his wide receiver 1 finish, certainly, capable of leading the entire position when everything is right. I tend to agree with you, Dwain. And again, we have these guys ranked top 4. I don't think these are going to happen. But I do wonder with Jefferson if it's one of those things where we have seen him overcome multiple quarterbacks, an older Kirk Cousins, Sam Darnold, Nick Mullins, and we just kind of get in our head like, okay, he's QB proof, but I don't know. Maybe JJ McCarthy coming off 2 knee injuries isn't going to be the same. Maybe Brett Rippien is forced to take some snaps. God forbid if Aaron Rodgers or someone else can't come in and be that bridge quarterback, because I don't know about you, Dwain, but just again, the fact that the Vikings have apparently shown enough interest in Aaron Rodgers for him to take this long to make up his mind doesn't exactly make me feel great about McCarthy coming back off of injury.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about Malik Nabers and other guys here in a second that have similar, like we have quarterback concerns or at least questions, right? Unknowns. And the thing people want to jump to is like, oh, well, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Well, some years it does and some years it doesn't, guys. Like variance is a funny thing. But I will say this, if you're playing with a lesser quarterback, like I do think it adds a better chance, right, that you fell versus where you're going in fantasy drafts. Does it always end up that way? No. And we just talked about wide receiver. You have to lean into the talent because like if you don't have talent, you can't succeed at the position. At running back, you can miss and then you pick up some other dude off the free agent waiver wire later in the season, right? That suddenly steps into a role and it's almost automatic. They're going to score you fantasy points. It's a lot harder to find players off the waiver wire at wide receiver. There's always going to be some guys like last year, Juwan Jennings was one of those darlings, Ian. But overall, a lot easier to pick up those running backs. So when it bring it like full circle back to like the question here with the quarterback play, sometimes it matters and sometimes it doesn't. Like, so there are years we can go back and look at where you can say, oh my God, like that quarterback did drag that wide receiver down. Then you have years like last year where it's like, oh, Malik Nabers didn't care too much. Like it mattered, but it wasn't something that kept him from being, a top 12 fantasy wide receiver. So it can really go either way.
Mention these guys again being the consensus big 4 wide receivers, but I would also say, Dwain, it's tough to keep them out of the top 7 overall players, as we discussed in our running back episode, which you guys can find wherever you're listening to us right now. We, of course, have Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, and, just our guy, Bijan Robinson at the top, and then these 4 wide receivers. So that really does seem to be a consensus top 7. After that is where things start to get a little bit more interesting, because I do think Puka Nacua probably deserves to maybe be in the second tier of guys. But even then, man, Nico Collins, Brian Thomas Jr., Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Malik Nabers. We are talking consensus wide receiver 5 through 8. However, our differing rankers do have them in different orders in certain cases. So now, Dwain, out of these guys, again, Nico Collins, BTJ, our one true sun god, and Malik Nabers, who would you worry about having the biggest bust risk?
I think it's Malik Nabers, just because, again, we're back to an unknown at quarterback. I know what he did last year, and it didn't matter last year, but I would prefer knowing that it's one of the top 2 rookie quarterbacks throwing in the ball, or even an Aaron Rodgers. Once we get outside those names, now, obviously, if it's Jameis Winston, we're going to love it. But the question mark then becomes how long before Jameis gets benched for picks, especially when you got a coach and a GM that maybe you're fighting for their job and they've got to try to win games. So I think the most risk is going to come not from a talent perspective, but because we don't know for sure what's going to happen with the quarterback. It does come down to Malik Nabers. I will say this, though, if Malik Nabers gets really good quarterback play, his ceiling is to immediately join the top 3. So the talent is absolutely there. I mean, we're talking about a guy, Ian, it's insane. I know we'll probably talk about Brian Thomas Jr. some more here in a second. When you talk about a rookie wide receiver that was able to do the things that Malik Nabers did, and you guys can check all this stuff out over in the utilization report tools on fantasylife.com, but 35% target share. That, dude, that's an insane number talking about any wide receiver. And this guy was a rookie doing that. If you look at him as far as the team's air yards, 46%, another insane number. And then he got 45% of their targets inside the end zone. That's, again, 30% is good. He got almost half the targets for the Giants in the end zone. So he was literally their whole offense in the passing game last season. And to see somebody do that as a rookie, we know the player is uber talented. It's just what's going to happen with these quarterbacks.
That said, Dwain, it wasn't like he just immediately came in and all of a sudden from week 1 to week 18 was taking over. I mean, we actually had a prolonged stretch where, yes, he missed 2 games with injury during this stretch, but from weeks 5 to 14 last season, Nabers didn't finish better than the wide receiver 23. I mean, really, the bulk of his points came in that first awesome 4-week stretch, and unfortunately got concussed against the Cowboys. And then we had, again, him going really crazy down the stretch last 4 or 5 games, particularly against the Colts, when the Giants cost themselves a chance to go ahead and get Cam Ward. So latest mock draft from Mr. Daniel Jeremiah actually has Shedeur Sanders going number 3 overall. I've been told for the last month, Dwayne, that Shedeur Sanders isn't even a first-round talent. It was going to fall out. So, kudos to Shedeur really having that post-combine rise, not playing any football, not doing anything, but apparently it's changed all the way. So I know you don't have exactly rookie quarterback supermodel, but any thoughts on Shedeur, someone who, again, really has emerged as one of the most accurate quarterbacks in college football history. However, not a lot of people out there liking his arm strength and maybe not exactly his aura, if you will, as well.
I've read a lot about Sanders, including from our own Thor Nystrom, and there are pros and cons, obviously, to his game. But the big thing I would say for what matters for this episode is I would still consider Shedeur Sanders an upgrade versus what they had last year, even if he doesn't live up to NFL expectations. And what if he is a really good quarterback, right? Like we said, people are split on the guy. There are a lot of people that actually do like Shedeur Sanders. And if an NFL team is willing to take him at pick 3 overall, Ian, I'm going to assume he's going to be better than what they had on the field last year. So in my opinion, whether it's Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, worst case scenario, Aaron Rodgers, those are all big upgrades. They have their own questions, but I would consider them upgrades versus what Malik Nabers had to deal with last year.
had some Sanders comps after watching him, a bunch just regularly on Saturdays and then diving into a bit more of his all 22. This is what I came away with, Dwain. Jacoby Brissett in a nice way, 35-year-old Russell Wilson. If the best parts of Sam Howell and Gardner Minshew were combined into one person, Sam Darnold with average arm strength and Courage the Cowardly Dog, who's awesome. I love Courage.
I don't know if I like any of those. You're making me not like this.
Those are still starting quarterbacks,
Yeah, okay. Yeah, they're starting quarterbacks. So we'll go with
Should I just say Joe Burrow and make everyone happy? Is that what we're doing?
No. You know me. I hate that stuff. Why do we have to comp everyone to like a former Hall of Famer? Like, we don't need to do that. I actually like that you're being reasonable. It's just making me a little sad. That's all.
And again, Courage, the Cowardly Dog, constantly put in duress, bad situations. The dude's, facing pressure all the time. But guess what? Has the clutch gene, usually comes out on top, and ultimately had an entire, franchise built around him. So I'm rooting for Shedeur Sanders. Certainly would be, a more fun NFL if we had a Coach Prime being constantly involved with, again, his favorite son, as I believe Dion actually said himself. So hopefully Shedeur or whoever else is able to elevate Malik Nabers. Obviously feeling pretty good about Brian Thomas Jr., Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Nico Collins in that class as well. Let's move down, though, Dwain, because I think it's, again, fairly easy to kind of have those guys as our top 8 wide receivers, and accordingly, we all do have them there. But once we get past that point, things start to get just a little bit more dicey. We got Drake London, A.J. Brown, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Ladd McConkey kind of sitting around that wide receiver 1 borderline. Out of that group, who do you think that you prefer, again, if you're on the clock?
Yeah, I mean, sitting right there, like you said, like it does get a little bit tougher right there. And each one of these guys, again, we could nitpick. Here's the thing I'm going to say, like A.J. Brown, we know the talent's there, but it could be a run-first offense, just like what we saw last year. And they've got another really good player in Devonta Smith and another pretty decent player in Dallas Goedert as far as, the other receiving options. So yeah, for now. But sitting there, I've got him at 10th, so just one spot below the rest of you guys in the ranks. Drake London, young, talented player. But what's Michael Penix going to be? Like, we don't know. Like, we hope that it's an upgrade, but we don't know for sure what Michael Penix is going to be. It was kind of good and bad. Like, if you go back and look at what we got from Penix last season, it wasn't like it was all good. And then if you look at JSN, like I've got him sitting, I moved him down a little bit. I'm not freaking out or anything, moving him down a little bit with the addition of Cooper Kupp. I'm still reading into the signal of Cooper Kupp that the Rams are willing to move on from him to sign another old wide receiver is not being a good sign for him. But I'm also acknowledging, like, he's a hard worker. Like, he's a pro. Like, he could come in and create some target competition for JSN. So moved him down a little bit. I've got Ladd McConkey just above that. So, I like all these players. I think they check the main box we want, which is they all have the talent, but you can slice and dice these a lot of ways where they have their own question marks. So, I mean, I am curious to you, like, if you had to pick one in the tier, is there one that you're like, if I drafted 10 times, I'm drafting this one 5, or are you mixing them all up?
I think I'm leaning towards that guy being A.J. Brown. The more I think about it, he just is the most proven best NFL player of the group. And we can talk about if Jalen Hurts deserves to be a top 5 QB or a top 10 QB. But we've already seen, again, 3 separate seasons of Brown going relatively bonkers in fantasy land, catching passes from Hurts. And man, if we do end up seeing Dallas Goedert traded, which has been all over the rumor mill over the course of these last, few weeks. I mean, now we're taking this passing game from a 3-pronged attack to 2, and AJB and Devonta Smith maybe could be booming better than ever before. So I know we're always going to be a bit run first and with Saquon there, but I don't know, man. A lot of turnover on that Eagles defense as well. I know they're still stockpiled. They got young assets all over, particularly that defensive line and, some of the secondary hits they have. I don't think they're going to go from, one of the best defenses to the worst or anything, but I do think there's a scenario where A.J. Brown booms, and again, just don't see the same level of red flag for him versus other guys. He only turns 28 in June. I know it feels like he's been around for forever because he's been balling ever since he joined the Titans and everything. But man, Dwain, like we haven't gotten that AJB just 14, 15 touchdown, a legit wide receiver 1 season. Why not in 2025?
Yeah, look, what you said about him being like the most proven talent of that group is like Absolutely true. Like there is no arguing it. This is a guy that can attack every single level of the field. You want to put him on like a deep end route and let him run after the catch, you can. You want to hit him on a quick slant and let him take it to the house and stiff arm a dude like a running back on the way. He can also do that. You want him to get over the top of a defense, can do that. Not like an amazing contested catch player. That would be like my only nitpick, but like still good. Like he's a physical wide receiver that wins more with his speed, right? Over the top versus being a contested catch guy. But he has shown that he can do it all. So I think there's no doubt that he's the guy that we would lean to as far as knowing he's a good player. But you do get into questions here again, like, and it does come, does Dallas Goedert leave? That would change the equation. But if like you had to call it the way it is today, like Ladd McConkey, if they don't add anyone else, like getting to play with Justin Herbert, like I could see him outscoring AJ Brown, right? So, I mean, I think the order's right. As we said, we're talking about it. I agree with you that AJ Brown is the most proven. And if you're looking for what's the most reliable pick of all these, I think that it is AJ Brown. If they hang on to Dallas Goedert, I think you might be able to make an argument like on volume alone. Maybe Ladd McConkey's got that higher ceiling, but he's not going to make the big plays you're used to seeing with AJ. Ladd McConkey, like I would be floored like if he scored 15 touchdowns, right? If AJ Brown did that, I would not be floored.
The thing with Ladd, I just can't get over the fact that the Chargers still haven't really upgraded anything. Maybe Mike Williams is going to be back to his normal self, back home a year removed from the knee injury and everything. But again, relative to what the rest of the NFL is telling us, adding Mike Williams compared to keeping Josh Palmer is a downgrade. And that's where things sit right now. Also haven't seen, a major tight end difference maker add to that Chargers offense as well. So I would think, Dwain, that they are going to, be in the Colson Loveland market. We even had some mock drafts wondering if Ted McMillan falls to the Chargers. Maybe he could be their first round pick, where I think in that case, maybe McConkey is going to be a bit closer wide receiver 12, wide receiver 15. But hey, man, if we do make it through, these next couple months scot-free and Ladd is still just pretty much set in the same role as he was last year, who's to say that he shouldn't actually be up there in that Brian Thomas Jr. conversation? After all, second half of last year, McConkey was straight up outscoring guys like BTJ and Nabers. That happened, man. I mean, from weeks 8 all the way through the end of the year, McConkey was the wide receiver 5 in PPR points per game. I mean, we don't want to give them that much credit. Still rank as a top 12 wide receiver, but that is the ceiling we're dealing with there. I do wonder as I look at this. I have JSN wide receiver 11. You have him wide receiver 12. Why? Why do we? Because if we look at these 4 players, man, he's easily had the most change going on, and I'm not so sure it's for the better.
Yeah, I mean, he's a young player that broke out in his second season. Like, we typically just want to lean into the players that we think are ascending the upside.
It's not like he just finished as a top 10 player.
Well, I get it, but he's also going into year 3 now. Like, so you also, like with young players, right, you're projecting, like, is there another step to be had? And that's part of what you're paying for, and that's part of what you're ranking. And so it's really just comes down to that. Like, again, if people have a preference to go with, like, I've got Drake London above him. I've got AJ Brown above him. I've got Ladd McConkey above JSN. So I've got him at the bottom, right, of this tier that we're talking about. But I do think that he belongs to be in it. Like, if we get to T. Higgins as the next guy, T. Higgins had great touchdown luck last year. Like, if you look at the rest of T. Higgins' career, if his touchdowns just regress back to normal and he's a 22% target share guy, like, he's not going to finish as a near wide receiver 1. So I think you can make an argument for maybe JSN has a higher ceiling if all the targets keep coming his way with DK Metcalf gone and you got an older Cooper Kupp. I think if you look at the next, well, I know we'll talk about Tyreek Hill here in a minute, but you got an older guy, right? And Tyreek Hill, is he potentially at the spot where he falls off versus JSN as the guy ascending? So I really do think it comes down to that. You got a first round talent that really did break out in the second half of last season, and you're thinking there could be more gas in the tank, right, for him to take it another level higher.
I just get worried when you look at it and like, okay, is Metcalf out and Kupp in? To me, it's going to be a crowded kind of underneath intermediate area of this offense. I don't think defenses are going to be saying, oh my God, Marquez Valdes-Scantling over there. We need to keep a safety over the top in that situation.
I think that's a risk. Yeah. I do think that's a risk for sure.
So Darnold last year, amazing, but that hasn't been the case all the time.
For sure. There are a lot of flags with JSN. Like, Darnold could regress with the pressure situation. Him and Cooper Kupp could eliminate each other. You could have the fact that them not being true complementary players crowds things, allows defenses to sit on things. There's a lot going on. We've even talked about the fact that Geno Smith actually was sometimes the bigger component of a JSN catch than himself, where he really didn't create a lot of separation. But Geno just trusted him and dropped it right in the bucket. Like, is he going to have that same trust from Sam Darnold, even though we know Sam Darnold can make similar throws to Geno Smith? There are a lot of questions. But again, for me, I think it does come back to you've got an ascending player. And it's just the kind of bet you got to consider making. But I would not blame anyone if they decided they want. And again, I've got JSN at the bottom of this tier we're talking about. So I am saying right now, in a vacuum, I would take Drake London, A.J. Brown, and Lab McConkey over him with what we know today. Sitting right here in the middle of March.
And even with me being a little bit of a hater here, I still would be hard pressed to move, JSN any lower than about that wide receiver 20 mark that, again, he finished last season. So that said, Dwain, again, we're talking mostly wide receivers, but more in the grand scheme of things, especially with someone like JSN. And we could be talking about a legit round 3, maybe even the end of round 2 draft pick here. So right now, as things stand, way too early ADP over at Underdog Fantasy. Appreciate you guys. Would you, Dwain? You're in one draft. It's your home league. You're on the clock. JSN, Jonathan Taylor, Bucky Irving, Josh Jacobs. Are you taking him over any of those running backs?
No. Well, I might take him over Josh Jacobs, but I'm taking JT. And I might even just go ahead and take Bucky right there. But I think JT is the one that's the most locked. Like Bucky, as much as we love him, and we've got him ranked high. We talked about him yesterday on the show. Like, we absolutely love Bucky Irving, but like, are we for sure what his role is going to? Him and JSN kind of get into similar territory, right? Young ascending players, you're trying to catch them on the rise. You know that they could actually be top 6 performers at their position, but there's a chance that they're on the other end of that spectrum, right? And they're more at the low end, like JSN, a wide receiver 2, like you mentioned. Bucky could be stuck in more of a committee than we're thinking, be more like a mid-range running back 2. Whereas with Jonathan Taylor, we're pretty sure what his role is going to be. This guy, while he's not like as explosive as he was really early in his career, he's still really good. They've paid him. He's going to be the lead back on their team. I don't think we're concerned about that. So I do think that JT is like an easier click than those two guys. If you're playing purely floor, you're saying, just give me the one I feel the best about knowing what their role is. I would say that is JT.
And again, as we move down our wide receiver ranks, invite you to check them out for yourself over at fantasylife.com. But this is where things start to get a bit tougher. Again, we're outside the top 12 at this point. I do think from, wide receiver 13 to even wide receiver 20, 21, if you wanted to maybe not completely flip it, but again, really make some big changes within that group, I would not necessarily be calling you crazy. And certainly, Dwayne, we can see that with my ranking of Tyreek Hill, just the wide receiver 19, which feels ridiculous to do until I look in last season, man, he wasn't even able to finish inside the top 30 options. And even once Tua was back in weeks 8 through 16, we're talking about just a wide receiver 24 in PPR points per game. So you also are a little bit lower than the rest. We have Freeman sitting there, wide receiver 12. You have him wide receiver 15. But what's, I guess, the, bull case for Tyreek Hill? Why is he going to bounce back? I mean, yes, I get it. He had the wrist injury, but he only had 3, charge drops by PFF. I don't think we were watching him going, oh man, only if Tyreek Hill's wrist was better, then this, would have changed the entire season. We have a guy who turned 31 a few weeks ago in an offense that I don't know if we can assume is ascending the same way maybe we were talking about it last year.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I don't have like the real answer to it is that what if last season was just variance? It was some, combination of all these weird things, because we know this happens. We see it happen all the time, and we try to label it and pretend we know why something happened. And then we try to project that to the next year, when really it was just, this outlier kind of situation. So the main thing for me with Tyreek Hill that keeps me at least a little higher than you, but I'm with you. I'm lower than consensus overall. I mean, is I look at it and I'm like, okay, in the 2 years before he scored 23.7 and 20.1 fantasy points per game. So, and he's still in a range where even if he's lost a little bit of his fastball, like he could be okay. Now, to your point, there's plenty of risk, man. Like, there's a chance that defenses have just caught on to all this motion stuff from Mike McDaniel. He's not able to really, create the separation and all the easy looks that he used to be able to, because once one or two defenses figure it out, well, then everyone has it because they just copy one another. There could also be a chance that Tyreek Hill really is falling off and that it's a rapid fall off. Sometimes we see these possession-like wide receivers that never depended on huge separation aging better than the guys that are really fast, because once you lose a little, now all of a sudden people are running even with you, especially younger cornerbacks and players that aren't aging, that are not as old as you are. So I think there's risk here with Hill, but when I see that upside of 20.1 and 23.7 fantasy points the 2 years before, it's enough that I'm like, okay, I don't want to be too low on Tyreek Hill. I won't blame anyone if they're out on him, but I still feel like there's a chance, man, like that he's a top 6 fantasy wide receiver and could squeak out a wide receiver 1 overall performance. Now, if the counterpunch that they came up with last year is what they have to go with again this year, which is Jonnu Smith and Achane getting all these additional targets, there's no way Tyreek Hill's getting to be a wide receiver 1 overall again. Like, he won't be a top 6. Like, 20% target share in the Dolphins offense is not going to cut it for a top 6 performance. So something does have to change.
It is one of those players, though, Dwain. I love, every year we get together around early August. We should honestly push it up. It just kind of helps us out, where we kind of discuss players who most scare us about fading. And Tyreek Hill is just one of those guys where I could see myself entering week 1. Didn't draft him hardly all offseason.
Him and CMC.
Yeah.
Like, at their positions. It's CMC at running back, and it's Tyreek Hill for me at wide receiver.
Just, 13 targets, 125 yards and a touchdown makes it look easy. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's Tyreek Hill. Why did we overthink this one? So still plenty of time to get that one right. But again, was certainly a, negative season after a lot of positive ones, and just not quite as sure about this, Dolphins offense as maybe we were 12 short months ago. So if Tua does go down again, it'll be Zach Wilson under center. Don't exactly love that given what we've seen over the years with Garrett Wilson and company. But again, maybe could be better than what we saw with Snoop Huntley. And guys, former Pro Bowl quarterback Snoop Huntley, of course.
How did you not lead with that?
I know, man. Just we'll watch the film.
If you're going to introduce Snoop Huntley at this point, you really should start with former Pro Bowl quarterback and then say Snoop Huntley. Like, I don't know why you don't.
Anyway, we have Garrett Wilson, Davante Adams, many more wide receivers in this range to talk through. First, though, guys, a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Hey, you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You gotta wait till it's done. Oh,
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, guys, talking through our consensus wide receiver rankings over at fantasylife.com. And after we get past the Big 12, got guys like T. Higgins, Tyreek Hill, but then Garrett Wilson, Terry McLaurin, Davante Adams, and Mike Evans. Dwayne, we were both on the same page in terms of preferring Mr. Adams over true number 1 options like Garrett Wilson, Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, and Zay Flowers. Do you think this might be a dumb idea for us to be trusting a guy turning 33 in December, or are we just learned scholars who know more than everyone else?
Look, there's definitely risk. Like, he's at the age where you don't always get a warning. It could just be a complete cliff. The problem is, like, he was so good last year, and you're going to put him in a scheme where we know Sean McVay is better than really any other coach in the NFL at being able to dial up, right, and layering on additional targets just through the scheme. It's a very rare ability that Sean McVay has to be able to do this with his wide receivers. So I am interested to hear like how they plan on utilizing him and Puka Nacua, because when Cooper Kupp was there, it was really Cooper Kupp playing more in the slot. Both of them got to be in motion a lot, but the way that they really helped Puka out, they gave him all the stuff around the line of scrimmage, right? That all went away from Cooper Kupp, went over to Puka. I expect that stuff to still be there. But if you were to hear in the preseason that no, Puka's also going to play the slot more and get all those looks, and now Davante Adams has to play on the outside. Not that he can't win there, but we have seen wide receivers get lost in the shuffle on the outside here. Now, none of them have been to Davante Adams' caliber, but we can go back to when it happened to Robert Woods. We can go back to Allen Robinson. We can even go back to Brandon Cooks, never really truly living up to his potential in the offense. So there are guys that were a lot more hit or miss when they had to play on the outside. So I do think that is something that we've got to pay attention to. Right now, I'm assuming that Davante Adams is at least going to get part of those looks on the inside. So, and again, like, it's when you start ranking them next to all these other guys, Ian. It's like, okay, the guy coming off the target share and everything that he did last year, and I got to put him next to Garrett Wilson. Well, I like Matthew Stafford better. Garrett Wilson's the younger player, but I got Matthew Stafford versus Justin Fields. Terry McLaurin, like, I think maybe you could argue, like, should we just lean to the younger player on Terry McLaurin? But again, McLaurin's never been a 35% target share guy, and Davante Adams has. So I get it. There is risk with him at his age, but didn't really show signs of slowing down last year. Was really good against man, really good against zone. Looks like all the prior concerns we honestly had about Davante Adams going into last year really just came down to he didn't have good quarterbacks when he was with the Raiders.
And I don't blame anyone who, wasn't exactly giving away their Sundays to watch Jets games after, late November and
Yeah.
December was getting going. But he really did start to come on strong at the end. Actually, in the last 6 weeks of the season, only Jamar Chase and Brian Thomas Jr. scored more PPR points than Davante Adams. But it was a great point about him working out of the slot, because during those final 6 weeks, he actually aligned more in the slot than he did actually out wide. And you would see, again, really great signs of not only releases, but even a lot of just quick screens from Aaron Rodgers, where honestly, I was surprised to see the amount of juice Adams still had after the catch. So I am not going to worry about a lesser wide receiver, still good, but a lesser guy like A-Rob, Allen Robinson, not exactly having a great transition to the Los Angeles Rams, because even with those duds in there, Dwain, even with Robert Woods, being a shell of himself in some of those later years when Stafford joined, since we have seen Stafford and Sean McVay get together, Rams wide receivers are second in total receptions and receiving yards. So yes, part of that is Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua being very good at football, but what have we seen with Davante Adams his entire career? So again, did not, in my opinion, see a fall off similar to what we have with Tyreek Hill last year. Still very much believe in Davante Adams is a stone cold baller. So anyone else out of that group, though, between Garrett Wilson, Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, and yes, I'm including Zay Flowers, that gets you excited? Because I know we talked about Flowers before, Dwayne, and, we got Rashad Bateman, DeAndre Hopkins, Mark Andrews for now, Isaiah Likely. It's a crowded Ravens offense. Is going to want to run the ball. But, man, if there is a player out there who we could just say, give him 150, 160 targets for once, and let's actually watch this guy blossom, I still think Zay Flowers can do everything you want your number one wide receiver to be able to do.
Yeah, I think Zay's the name to talk about, because we've talked about Garrett Wilson plenty in some of our previous shows, talking about Justin Fields landing there and the concerns we have. But Zay Flowers, like heading into his third year, we've just never seen him like truly take the next step, but it's only his third year. Like, this guy has shown that he can be a strong target earner. If they were to move on from Mark Andrews, like, he would by far be the top guy remaining on the team. With Andrews unlikely, they're the other two guys there that can demand targets. So he's in an environment where he can be the clear wide receiver one as far as the way the targets are going to flow. I would just like to see them more consistently use him down the field, Ian. Like, we see him get loose and we see him run these routes and get open and even make the big plays. And then it's like 2 weeks later, they'll like keep him more around the line of scrimmage, right? And it's like there's a different game plan based on who they're playing against. And that's the one big thing I would say with Zay Flowers that concerns me. But at his age, going into the third year and looking what he's done over his first 2 seasons, like, he's totally a guy, right, that could break out. Last year at a 26% target share. That's really good. Again, the air yards, 29%. And so a little bit lower, but that's because there are these games where, he'll have like in week 18, he had average depth of target was 1.5. You go to week 10, it was a 5. Week 7, it was -2. Week 6, it was 5. So there's these weird game plan things that they do with Zay Flowers. And then you'll see the flip. Week 13, it was a 19. Week 11, it was a 14. And typically it's those weeks where he's getting used all over the field that he has his big fantasy performances versus just being dialed in as the guy just working underneath. And look, we'll take those free touches, but all I'm telling the Ravens is, like, this guy is good enough, like, when you watch him, to actually do all the things. Just let him do all the things. Don't like pigeonhole him based on a game plan.
Again, some weeks he's doing everything. We had a 5-week stretch where he had over 110 yards in 4 separate games. But, Dwayne, the 2 games that kind of were squeezed in there, 1 target against the Buccaneers in 60 minutes of football. He didn't get hurt. 2 targets against the Bills. In the game, they blew him out. So I'm not, critiquing the Ravens, because obviously their offense is doing just fine in both those games. They also scored 41 against Tampa Bay. But, it's some of those Ravens games, and honestly the Packers as well, with Jaden Reed, who I don't think is as good as Zay Flowers, but you can use them both in similar ways. Hand them the football, use them on screens, where I just can't fathom how you can't go through a football game and get Zay Flowers at least 5 or so touches. So again, hopefully year 3 is going to be bigger and better things. But just when you really watch these guys and what they're able, man, really does seem to be moving at a different speed than everyone else. So still only 24 years old. Yes, I'm talking myself into Zay Flowers more by the second here. But let's keep on moving on here, Dwayne, because as we get going, there are more players behind Zay Flowers who also profile as number 1 wide receivers in their offense, specifically Chris Olave, Jerry Jeudy, Calvin Ridley, maybe even Mr. Juwan Jennings, who you shouted out earlier as really being a waiver wire darling last season. So at this point, we are getting basically outside of our top top 24 wide receivers. We can throw Marvin Harrison Jr. in there as well if we would like to. DK Metcalf also sitting on the wide receiver 2 borderline. But out of some of those names I just mentioned, Dwain, again, kind of in this big mix, probably more in the middle rounds. Anyone, strike you as someone you particularly want to target?
No, I like the call on Olave. Again, I think these guys, the way you set them up, right? Wide receiver 1's on their team right now. But they haven't necessarily ever given us that super high end wide receiver 1 performance. Right. Now, a lot of these players are still younger and they still have the ingredients that theoretically it could still happen. And I think Chris Olave is the best fit of that. He's just a guy that every chance he's had of being on the field, he's earned the targets, but it hasn't always worked out for whatever reason. Him and his quarterbacks haven't been able to get on the same page. His uncatchable air yards and his uncatchable target rates always seem to be high. Some of it comes down to shots down the field, but I can't put my finger on it as to why that's happening. But we can't just put it all on the quarterbacks. Some of that's probably coming back to Chris Olave. Obviously some medicine balls in there from Carr that we definitely need to see taken out of the equation because that's what knocked Chris Olave out last season. This is a guy that's had multiple concussions over the course of his career. So that's something we don't want to see happening to him anymore. But if I were to look at one of these guys and say, you look at the path to being the wide receiver 1 on the team and it's there. And then there's also if things suddenly clicked for him, this one area that hasn't worked out, which is actually getting those connections due to the uncatchable targets, he could be a borderline wide receiver 1. Chris Olave has done a lot of things there that we can like. I would say he's ahead of DK Metcalf in that range. Metcalf's kind of shown us, I think, that he's a really good wide receiver 2. He's not going to dominate at all the different areas, but I feel there's still a chance Chris Olave could unlock that for us. The other one you didn't mention that I was curious why you didn't bring him up was your guy, Courtland Sutton. I know we don't think that he's an alpha, but he's kind of in the same range. As of right now, he's the top earning target on his team. They did add Evan Ingram, but DK Metcalf versus George Pickens, that's kind of a similar situation.
With Sutton, in the spirit of, just bringing up the optimal kind of weak ranges here, and we're just trying to hype up the players that, we're trying to target here. Let's see, Courtland Sutton, after that infamous goose egg in week 7 on Thursday Night Football, he worked as a wide receiver 12 right there alongside Justin Jefferson in PPR points per game down the stretch. Obviously, Bo Nix impressed as a rookie. And as we get through, the offseason, Broncos still made a meaningful addition to their wide receiver room. I know they added Evan Ingram, but I don't think Ingram's really going to be taking away many routes or targets, from what Sutton is doing on the outside. So, yeah, man, I have him wide receiver 23. You guys are all lagging behind. You're higher than Freeman, insultingly low, wide receiver 32. But why is he being treated more as a wide receiver 3, Dwain? Because, I don't know, personally, I've seen enough where I think Sutton is a legitimate number 1 wide receiver. We like Bo Nix. We like Sean Payton. What am I missing?
Yeah, I think it's just because that was by far his best season. So it's kind of back to the, hey, Tyreek Hill, the 2 years before are really good, and then you have a fall off year. Which is the truth? The 2 years before, the fall off after? Is it somewhere in between? I think people still feel the same way about Courtland Sutton. They look at it and they're like, okay, I believed in Courtland Sutton for so long. I kept drafting him in fantasy, and then he never really did anything. At the best case, right, he was this low end wide receiver 3 we couldn't really use. And then suddenly last year it does change. Now, I think you can look at it and be like, well, they added a quarterback upgrade. It looks like they really did hit on Bo Nix. They really utilized him a way that was similar to what we've seen from guys like Michael Thomas and some of these other guys. It wasn't like they were just asking Courtland Sutton to run gassers down the field, which is what he was doing. Not gassers, but a lot of it was outside and deeper down the field in previous seasons. With Jerry Jeudy gone, that did open up, I think, more of an opportunity for him to work some of the inside stuff. So I think the biggest thing, though, is people look at it and okay, one good year from Courtland Sutton, but the rest of his history is telling me that might be a fugazi.
He had an 1,100-yard year before that ACL. And then, I know you're right in terms of numbers, even with it, only had 6 touchdowns that year. He has been more so in that low-end wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range even. But my God, man, it was hilarious. The NFL YouTube channel will always do their top 100 plays after the season. Then I swear, Dwain, in 2023, Sutton must have had 8 or 9, man. Every single touchdown catch he caught from Russ was just of the insane toe tap or, mossing 2 guys variety. So I maintain Courtland Sutton good at football. He's honestly a candidate that could be getting one of these bigger money extensions sooner rather than later. And man, if we're sitting here after the draft and the Broncos have continued to go through the entire offseason and not added a single meaningful competition for him at wide receiver, I think Courtland Sutton's going to be someone when you start diving into those projections, Dwayne, that maybe you're going to be bumping up here as well.
Yeah, I agree. He's going to do well in the projections because I do like Bo Nix. I believe in what we saw from him. I don't know that I'll forecast like a huge step forward from Bo Nix. We know Sean Payton wants to be in a balanced offense. But yes, I do think that even with the addition of Evan Ingram, when you look at the rest of the roster, I think Cortland Sutton's going to project well. Marvin Mims will be the only other real guy there. And then, all the rest of the targets will probably give to the running backs because it's a Sean Payton offense.
All right, I got another bone to pick. I'm on an island with another player, Dwain. Calvin Ridley, my wide receiver 30. None of you guys have him ranked higher than wide receiver 37. So obviously got paid a lot of money in the last free agency cycle to go be the wide receiver 1 for the Titans. And no, it didn't exactly return, the biggest numbers in the world. Did clear 1,000 yards, but means a little bit less than 17 game seasons. And more than anything, this offense was, again, just more so defined by the ineptitude of Will Levis and to only a slightly lesser extent Mason Rudolph than anything Ridley was able to do. So not guaranteed that we're going to get a massive quarterback upgrade from that. But on the other side of things, man, maybe Cam Ward is the real deal. Maybe he's going to be the guy at 101. And as much as, we're talking about Malik Nabers going to the moon if Jameis Winston somehow makes his way to the Giants, Dwayne, I really could see Calvin Ridley having a similar Jerry Jeudy-esque breakout if by some miracle the football gods give us Jameis Winston over there in Nashville, man. I've been watching Calvin Ridley all day long, man. This guy is still really good at football. He's younger in NFL years than the actual ages because of the suspension and some of the injuries. Like, why can't Calvin Ridley make 2025 the year that everyone finally realizes how freaking good this dude is?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could happen, but he's around I think he's fairly placed around a bunch of different names that I feel similarly about. Jerry Jeudy, Calvin, you got Calvin Ridley, then you got, George Pickens, I feel a little bit less about now that you got DK Metcalf, but I've already moved him down the ranks. But you've got Jalen Waddle, who we know is a good, young, talented wide receiver in Miami. We've got Juwan Jennings playing for the 49ers. He had a really good last year. So I feel like there's a big tier here. And honestly, I do agree that like this tier needs to be reworked by me. I will say that if you get Cam Ward and that is the direction they decide to go, I know our latest mock draft had Abdul Carter going number 1 overall to the Tennessee Titans, but it does feel like a lot of the other news around the Titans has been leaning towards Cam Ward being the top pick. He'll get a little bit of a bump, but again, like I just have a hard time like putting one of these guys on a pedestal and saying, oh my God, I'm so much more sure about them than the others. So I do agree with you. Like when you look at Calvin Ridley's underlying data points, like from like a talent profile standpoint, like look at his target share, air yard share, end zone, all these things that we like to look at, he does meet a lot of the marks for a wide receiver too. So if he does get a good quarterback, I do think that the ceiling is that we could see Calvin Ridley perform more like a wide receiver 2, even though in fantasy drafts, you're getting to draft him more like a high-end wide receiver 4 right now.
So I'm saying, like, you talk about guys where you're drafting them closer to their floor than their ceiling, and that's what we saw last year. Okay, that was a floor season for Ridley, I think, given, again, the amount of volume he's able to get here. And he finished as a wide receiver 41 in PPR points. So, yeah, I would like to see that number be a lot higher, and it is a couple spots higher if you put, a certain games played threshold in there. But that was with Dwayne, him being the only wide receiver in the NFL with over 1,000 unrealized air yards. So, Rome Odunze, Cortland Sutton, Malik Nabers, other guys on that list, Marvin Harrison Jr. as well. But man, like again, when you just kind of go through, like Dwayne, can you name the number 2 pass game option in Tennessee right now?
No.
It's
Nick
Van
Westbrook,
Jefferson.
Your favorite is gone. Oh, that's the same thing as Nick Westbrook-Akini. Look, it's low target competition, but again, like I don't, it's tough for me to say, and I guess this is a question to you. Like, what makes you so confident that you want to put Calvin? I've got him at 37. You got him at 30. Friedman's 38. Waz is 38. So you're 8 spots above. What makes you so confident that you want to put him above Jerry Jeudy, above Jordan Addison, above Jacoby Myers, who we know has a good quarterback that's underrated every single season? Juwan Jennings, with Deebo Samuel gone, Brandon Ayuk's going to be hurt at the beginning of the year. And I'm not saying you're wrong on these things. I just couldn't find a reason to say, oh my God, I have to put Jerry Jeudy there. And when that sort of thing happens, honestly, I kind of lean more towards ADP. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to put him around where he goes in drafts. I'm saying I would take him, but I don't, like, you're more making a stand here that you think he should go over these other players.
We're both mistakenly saying Judy for Ridley's name time and time again because they're very similar players. If you had to pick two players from that group, Dwain, who actively finished with over 150 targets, it's them. And that's why I'm trying to chase that volume there. And I do actually think that he remains very good at football. People are just still up in their feelings about him dropping a few too many passes with the Jaguars a couple seasons ago. But I don't know, man.
But don't you think Jalen Waddle's good at football too? Like, and I mean, there's a lot of guys in this range that I think actually are good. Like, I think Jalen Waddle's good. I think Jacoby Myers is good. I think Jordan Addison is good. I think
but they're all clear number twos, all clear number twos in their offense.
That's fair. So, yeah, okay. So that's a good, hey, why didn't you say that to start? You probably did. I wasn't listening. I was probably thinking about what I was going to say. Yeah, no,
Speaking of so again, we have more of a clear-cut pecking order in those offenses, but want to finish off, Dwain, with two offenses that we don't really have a clear idea about, and accordingly, we don't have a single wide receiver from either of them ranked inside of our top 36. Kicking things off with the Green Bay Packers. And this one's interesting because going into it last year and even for portions of last season, I mean, we knew we had Jaden Reed, and there was Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, and Christian Watson, where we were almost seeing a rotation with Watson, Wicks, and Doubs on the outside, and then there was enough two tight end stuff going on, along with that aforementioned rotation, that Jaden Reed wasn't getting as many routes as we wanted. Shocked, Dwain. Shocked when I tell you today, and it doesn't happen a lot. When I look up stats, I kind of have an idea of where a guy's going to be anyway. Jaden Reed had 75 targets in a 17-game season last year. That's it, okay? He added on like 20 rush attempts, but 75 targets for your best wide receiver, absolute war crime from the Packers. But going into 2025 now, Christian Watson's coming off that late season knee injury. We actually had his dad go on Twitter, thank you, Mr. Watson, for basically saying, that he's not going to be available until the second half of the year. We'll say week 10, week 11 as a starting point. So potentially now as things stand, we do have this wide receiver room dwindled down. We like Jordan Love. We like LaFleur. We like what we have in Green Bay. Why don't we like any of the wide receivers more?
Well, I think Jaden Reed is the only one with what we're dealing with Christian Watson where we really do feel like there's potential for upside, if I'm being honest. Like Romeo Doubs, I feel like is a good player for where they drafted him, right? I believe he was a 5th round pick coming out. He's definitely exceeded that. But he's just really more of a possession kind of player. If we think about Dontavian Wicks, obviously some of the underlying data points are there, but he's not been able to be consistent, doesn't get on the field enough. So Jaden Reed, is the main candidate in my mind to be the guy that could take a step forward, but they really limit him to playing in 3 wide receiver sets, and they want to make him the slot. I don't understand why you can't make this guy your Z wide receiver when you go to 2 wide receiver sets. And if they would do that, I think there's a potential here that Jaden Reed could be a value in fantasy drafts. I do think that the talent, I don't think it's maybe on the level we were thinking after his first season as a rookie. Like he did take a little bit of a step back last year. Targets per route run dropped from 23% to 19%. So it wasn't just all Jaden Reed not being on the field enough. He actually regressed a little bit in the target department, but 2.20 yards per route run. That's a good number. That's in wide receiver 1 territory. So I do think there are things to like about Jaden Reed. Incomplete profile right now because we have this worry about playing time. But we also know, Ian, that a lot of times we may think we can decipher what coaches are going to do, and we're just wrong. So they could suddenly decide to play Jaden Reed more often on the outside. And if we were able to project that, and you were able to put him at like a 90% route participation, he's a guy that we would be drafting closer to wide receiver 2 territory versus where he's falling right now in fantasy drafts.
Just became the first man, Dwain, without the last name Samuel to lead all wide receivers in rushing yards since 2018. Shout out to Debo and even Curtis for accomplishing that in the meantime. But even in that facet of the game, too many weeks went by without seeing some level of design goodness for Jaden Reed. Usually only tapped into that at a high level when they had Malik Willis under center. So, man, really was one of those situations where when you go back in the season with the benefit of hindsight and say, who should I have traded away after the first half, sold high on, really it was Jaden Reed. And I think he might have even pointed that out, Dwain. So good job by you. But again, more so because of the opportunity, not because we doubt the talent at hand. But, Dwain, you have also been pounding the drum a bit for one Dontavian Wicks over the years. And there's been a lot of us as well. So I'm not trying to put you on an island or anything. But really promising rookie year, not so good second year. Maybe year 3 is the time he puts it all together.
Well, I mean, he's going to get an opportunity with, we'll see what they do in the draft. But he's going to get an opportunity if they don't go after a wide receiver with an early pick. And the thing with Dontavian Wicks is the flashes of goodness are there. but also flashes of really bad things are there. And it does come back to, the drops. And while I don't think drops are necessarily sticky, and I think most wide receivers can play through that, I'm not saying that some wide receivers don't have better hands than others. But I think once things finally level out, it's typically not that big of a deal. But that just hasn't been the case yet for him, right? It's really been a struggle for 2 years in a row. So maybe it is a hand-eye coordination thing. I'm not quite sure. I think that the big playability is there for Wicks, but is the consistency, can it ever be there? So I think he's really just more of a late round dart throw, and you're hoping to get lucky at this point. But I will say he does check off certain boxes that other wide receivers going in his range of fantasy drafts right now don't check. And so that's mainly the thing that I'm looking for is, players that are grouped with like 10 others that I'm like, they've got this thing that these other 10 guys going in their range don't have. Dontavian Wicks can still be a player like that.
Let's close things out with a look at another muddled wide receiver room, and that is of the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, we do have Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice ranked higher than, some of these other players. They actually are both, I believe, inside the top 24. But are they going to be out there? Dwain, Worthy just had this, wonky thing going on where he ended up, we don't know the specifics, but he's going to be potentially in some trouble with the law. They're at least looking into those allegations. And then we have the Rashee Rice situation that, does our legal system care about anything? Is this guy just going to play for another 10 years before actually stuff wraps up? I don't know, man. But the latest I can tell with Rashee Rice is that his trial is going to be beginning around June. They don't get it pushed back by then, but if it's only beginning then, who knows if anything is actually going to be done by the time the season comes around, also coming off that brutal injury. So we have question marks with Worthy. We have question marks with Rice. That said, if they are both healthy, they're going to be starting just like you would think one Hollywood Brown as well. So again, we have so much to sort out with Worthy and Rice. I don't want to, completely speculate while we don't know anything, but what do you make of Hollywood Brown right now, Dwayne? Because he just got the same deal as last year. And I know this time last year, we were looking at him as the potential leader of the pack, at least someone who could be, working his way into the wide receiver 2 conversation. So new year, new offense, new Hollywood, I get it. But you talk about someone right now who's ranked, outside of our top 50 that after a couple good weeks could be skyrocketing up, might be Marquise Brown.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, I don't know whether he's going to be able to take advantage of it. Have injuries over the course of Hollywood Brown's career just kind of zapped some of that electricity that we saw from him very early on in Baltimore. And I think the answer is we don't know. We saw him turn into a really strong target earner in Arizona in those games without DeAndre Hopkins. So he proved he had this other level to his game. He even kind of showed that last year with the Chiefs, even though he never got into a full-time route participation to truly unlock all that. But he had a 25% targets per route run. So this is a guy that multiple times over the last 3 to 4 years has looked more like a wide receiver 2 from a target earning perspective. What he hasn't looked like is his old self that could turn a lot of those plays into these big plays down the field or run after the catch scenarios. And again, last year, having to play through an injury, but he got hurt, missed all the time. Maybe not quite on the same page, with the rest of the offense coming back. Who knows? Maybe some of it was conditioning. But either way, missed time and was coming back from an injury, which might have impacted his play. So if you get a full healthy offseason from Hollywood Brown, one of these other 2 scenarios potentially break negatively for one of the other players, whether it's Worthy or Rashee Rice. And there's multiple angles, obviously, on the Rice one that you mentioned. It could be injury. It could be legal. Yeah, I do think that Hollywood Brown is a name that, honestly, if Rashee Rice were to get suspended tomorrow for 4 or 6 games, or something definitive came out that said he's not going to be right until week 8, Hollywood Brown's going to move up, right? Yeah. And so I think he is a name that if you're drafting in early best ball drafts, I would be drafting him now because I think he's probably moving up from here no matter what, because the Chiefs do like to run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. Even if those other 2 guys are fully healthy, he's going to be on the field. Like he's going to be out there and he's going to be playing. So I do think that he is one of these guys. To your point, good credit to you. Guys going outside of like the top 48 right now. Yeah. That's kind of wild.
Do wonder if maybe we're just 1 year too early on that Chiefs passing game, getting back to partying like it's 2019 or 2020 again, but plenty of time to again refine those takes and figure it out for sure. Last thing, Dwayne, in one word, who's winning March Madness?
Who's winning March Madness? I don't know. I haven't even looked at a bracket. That's more than one word. No, I haven't. Rookie Super Bowl. I can tell you that.
Tennessee,
All right, fine.
Rocky Top. Let's go. Make sure you guys check out all of our March Madness content over at Fantasy Life as well, as well as our updated ranks. But that's enough from Dwain and myself. We appreciate you guys tuning in to another episode of the Fantasy Life Show, and we'll be back with plenty more goodness the rest of the offseason. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in to the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.